I'm curious about your switch from working on same-sex marriage in New York to campaign finance reform. Can you tell me a little bit about what compelled you to work on this issue?
Yeah, so I'm still working on the marriage equality issue, but campaign finance is clearly an issue that is becoming more and more important every day. I mean, every single morning we're waking up to another story about a new billionaire throwing tens of millions of dollars into another race, and I think we're all seeing the negative impact that's having on our democracy. It's taking away the power from voters and from everyday Americans, and it's putting in the hands of a small group of wealthy people, and that's not the way our democracy is supposed to function. So, and as a New Yorker, it made sense to me to start at home and say, how is the New York State campaign finance system working? And the answer is it's not working. I mean, right now, New York has one of the worst campaign finance systems in the country. You can contribute more than $60,000 to a statewide race. You can basically give unlimited money through LLCs and housekeeping funds, and so it's really a broken system in a similar way to how the federal system is broken. So what we decided to do is launch Protect Our Democracy, which is a new initiative to fix New York's campaign finance system and to take the model that New York City has of a very healthy campaign finance system where there's public matching funds that elevate the small donor and the grassroots donor and make sure that that's balanced with some of the larger money that comes in politics. So we're looking to pass a campaign finance bill in New York in the next year. We're working closely with Governor Cuomo and a coalition of groups who are also working on the issue, and we're very excited about our chances. And one of the things that we're trying to do is show the connection between the state campaign finance issues and the federal issues, and people are fired up about campaign finance reform in a way that they haven't been in the past. And so what we want to say to them in the next year is, if you're angry about it, if you want to do something about it, we're going to have an opportunity here in New York to actually get something done and pass a bill, and that's our hope.
So how do you find that it's different from your work on same-sex marriage? Is it more difficult? What's the difference there?
Yeah, well, clearly they're different issues in a lot of ways, and working in Albany is a unique thing. So once you've gotten some experience in Albany, I wanted to put it to use in other ways. But I think what's similar is that there are issues in which you have to show people the path to victory, and you have to sort of show the incremental steps that can be done. So I think the campaign structure is going to be pretty similar. I think we need to make it easy for people to call their lawmakers, to have in-person meetings, to make the case, and there's going to be a lot of similar components. And what's also similar is it's pretty likely that we're going to have to move a handful of Republicans on the issue. So we're going to have a bipartisan campaign. We're going to have to make the case that, as with marriage equality, campaign finance reform is not a Democratic issue, it's not a Republican issue, it's an American issue, it's an issue for all New Yorkers.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. You spoke about, the Republican whose daughter convinced him to support same-sex marriage. And earlier this week, I went to a Senate Judiciary Subcommittee hearing on Citizens United. And it was great. Everyone was very much on the same page, but they were all Democrats. Not one Republican showed up. How do you get Republicans involved on this issue? How do you get them? I mean, are they or do you find that they're obstructing this issue, or are they just indifferent?
Well, the good news is, in New York, 74% of New Yorkers want campaign finance reform. And so Governor Cuomo in January, in his State of the State address, called for campaign finance reform that had public matching funds, lower contribution limits, and greater transparency and enforcement. And a poll was done the next week, and it showed that 74% of people supported that plan, and it included a majority of Republicans and Democrats and independents. So that's the good news. The good news is when we frame it in the right way, people are there and they're with us and they want to support it. I think what we need to do is show that there's actually a really strong history on the Republican side of campaign finance and of public funds. So Ronald Reagan, when he ran for president, both times took public funding. That's something that we've sort of forgotten about. And Republicans like John McCain have been involved historically and helped lead the charge on campaign finance. So I think we need to not box ourselves in and frame it as a partisan issue. I think we need to show that there's a strong history of bipartisanship, and that's what we need to get back to.
Yeah, what about the Disclose Act last week, how Republicans totally flip-flopped on their support for that?
It was very disappointing. I think for me, it was an example of how campaign finance reform has stalled at the federal level, and why we need to work at the state level. Because I think we need to make tangible progress somewhere. And right now in New York we have that opportunity, and in other states I hope we'll have that opportunity, because the federal government isn't doing its work. The Supreme Court is wrong on the issue. Congress has stalled. And so I think there's actually an opportunity here for the states to lead, to create a model that other states can use, but also that eventually I think the federal government could use.
Yeah, are you in touch with people doing similar work in other states?
Yeah, well, the campaign finance world is unfortunately not huge, so we certainly talk to each other, and I wish it were bigger. But yeah, there's a lot of national groups that have worked in multiple states, like Common Cause and Brennan Center, and a lot of great folks who are out there who are using that history and that track record in our coalition to pass it in New York.
Cool. So one example of sort of a local way of how the influence industry works is happening right now in New York with fracking. Governor Cuomo is considering whether or not to allow fracking in 5 counties, and he says he'll listen to science, and there's a lot of grassroots opposition to fracking, but at the same time there's also a lot of money behind on the other side. I think it's the oil and gas industry spent $4.5 million lobbying on this in the past 3 years. They've spent like over $1 million on campaign contributions. How is that playing out? Do you think that the influence industry will have an impact on his decision?
Yeah, well, I think your question comes to a really important point, which is we need to tie campaign finance reform to other issues. I mean, there's a reason why environmental bills aren't getting passed if they need to get passed. There's a reason why our tax code isn't more fair. There's a reason why we're not seeing the kind of common sense good government reforms that we need, because there are industries behind it. There are other people working against us. So I think we'll be able to fire up New Yorkers and fire up the American people more on campaign finance when we touch it, when we attach it to their real life, when we say, your economic well-being, your opportunity for jobs, your opportunity for clean water and clean air and for infrastructure is being impacted by where money is coming from in politics. If we can connect those things, I think that will be important.
Do you think the politicians who are making this decision on fracking specifically are aware of that? Are they, how do you think they're weighing that out?
I think fracking, like a lot of other issues in New York, is having money on both sides, and money's playing too big of a role, and I think that's true in a lot of issues in New York. It's not an issue where I've really engaged a lot, but I think the environment definitely is a good example of where literally our air, our water, our environment is at risk because too much money in industry is being pushed to stop smart, common sense regulation.
Yeah. Did you read Bill McKibben's big article in Rolling Stone a few weeks ago?
Yeah.
I wanted to ask him about that.
Yeah, it's a huge problem, and we're not tackling it, and we're not facing it, and a lot of this comes down to money in politics, and that's really what made me want to get involved in this issue in the first place, was that I care about a whole set of issues, from climate change to education and infrastructure and the economy, but what underpins that more than we want to admit is money in politics. You have to work on both at the same time if we're going to make real progress.
Great. I think that's